It's impossible with that one.
Okay.
You ready?
Recording now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Podcasting 101.
No, it got a new title.
We got a new title.
It's true, it did go.
That's right. Audio 101. We're basically going to talk about podcasting. Of course, we're all podcasters, audio people, and we're here to talk about how you guys can learn how to do podcasting. I teach people how to do it on a basis. I teach at a community college and also mentor people on how to podcast. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. And it's great to bring new people in, to bring fresh blood and the enthusiasm, but also to make people feel realistic about it. Because podcasting in a lot of ways is a hobby, but you can be successful at it, but you're not going to be the next Mark Maron. You're not going to be the next Kevin Smith. You're not going to be the next gaming guru out there, but it's kind of cool.
It's still possible.
It is possible. It is always possible. So someone in here next year might be up here with us talking about it, and that's pretty awesome about it. Let's go down, and from the end here, let's introduce everybody.
Yeah, hi, I'm MC Williams. I'm the host of the Myths Your Teacher Hated podcast. It's a not safe for work mythology show that tells folklore and mythology from around the world with all of the sex and violence left in.
Next.
Okay, my name is Rob Greenlee, and I'm the Vice President of Content and Partnerships for Libsyn, which is a big podcast hosting platform, but I'm a longtime podcaster. I started in 2004. And I've hosted a bunch of different podcasts over the years, was on nationally syndicated radio for 6 years. And then, but I'm currently doing a podcast called The New Media Show with Todd Cochran, who's the CEO of Blueberry, which are the two sponsors of the event here. So I've been podcasting a really long time and doing multiple shows for many years. And I used to work for Spreaker too, and did the Spreaker Live show for about 4 years as well. So my whole job is teaching new podcasters how to get started, best practices, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Dennis?
Hi, my name is Dennis Robinson, otherwise known as the world's most okayest DM. I am the DM and also the audio editor on Botched, a D&D podcast. We've been working on the show now for 3 years and change, surprisingly. This is our third Dragon Con, so yeah, it has to be a little bit more than 3. Yeah, you guys in the back, is there security? We could just kick them out? That'd be great. Yeah.
Awesome. My name is Steven Adams. I'm the co-host of Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. It's an odd and crazy news show hosted by odd and crazy hosts. I do with my wonderful sister-in-law Smashy over here. It's just a comedy show. It's nuts. I've been podcasting since 2005. Had a few shows that failed and one that's been relatively successful, so there is hope. And then I'm sitting up here with these awesome people, so that's good stuff. But yeah, that's us.
Next man is an honor, because in my class, I actually recommend his book. And Podcasting for Dummies, for anyone who wants to get into it, is almost a must-get book. And I'm very proud that Chuck is up here.
Well, thanks for the plug. Thank you very much.
He can go home now.
I don't need to say anything more.
I do have my Square readers if anybody wants to buy a copy. So, just making sure I'm prepared. My backstory is I've been podcasting since about 2004. So, like Rob, old timer, when you rolled your own RSS feed. Hey, what were you thinking? And have taken that to a number of other podcasts. One still running since 2005. I do with Craig Stepp called Technorama. We have another one that we just did with Craig Stepp and Clinton at Elvord last night called The Topic is Trek. You can kind of guess what it's about from the title. And I was very fortunate enough when I changed jobs about 10 years to be able to take those podcasting skills and tie them directly into my job. And it really was a career steering decision that I made on a whim back in 2004. I now produce monthly webinars with Craig. We both work for the same company. I think it's called ServiceNow. Thank goodness I wear the lanyard. and the tag is so when you get drunk, the police can identify the body. We do a webinar. I've got multiple streams that I do, lots of audio video production that I can take to work, and they pay me for having fun with my hobby. And I wake up every morning and go, how did a computer science guy get into marketing again? I don't care. They're paying me for my hobby. So it really do feel blessed. Of course, all the friends around the world that listen and watch is a great, great honor.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So the way we do these panels are, we want you guys to ask questions. The first question, though, I'm going to ask everyone here. Who in here is currently podcasting? Okay.
Nice.
Oh, you don't have your hands raised?
No,
He
I-
said,
I
well,
quit as
currently,
of
yes,
today.
we are. We're recording this.
Yeah. But, basically, so we have a few people who are already, how many people already know they want to do a podcast?
All right, awesome.
Come on, Scott.
Yes.
There's still a
We've had a
few
lot of
more
talks
out
this
there that
weekend.
maybe are a
So-
little scared to raise their
do it.
hand. But
Exactly. By
you
the
could
end
get
of
there.
this, everyone's
Right.
going to be raising their hands, and that's the great thing about it. We've got a great bunch of experts up here. So I want you guys out there, what questions do you guys have? What we're going to do is basically toss this microphone. Doesn't hurt if it hits you. So anyone have questions to start off? Because anybody could start podcasting. As long as you have a phone, you could podcast. As long as you have a mobile device.
That's the truth.
I like this, by the way. What equipment would you recommend?
Well, you want me to take that?
Anybody.
What I would recommend that you first figure out is what kind of show you want to produce, and then back into the kind of equipment that you need, because depending on the production, that will dictate what kind of equipment that you need. There's really no
Yeah.
one way to do this. So you need to figure out what kind of show you're producing and then get the proper equipment that can get you set up to do what you want to do.
Some
So-
rigs are better for sitting at your desk at your home all by yourself. Others, you may want to be out on the road, plug in a microphone, and
Just
do
talk
a
on your phone.
roadcast. It really depends on what your content is that's going to drive you. You may need a portable microphone. You may need a professional dynamic microphone that's going to cost a few $100s. You may need a shotgun microphone, so it's not on camera. There's lots of different. We could talk microphones all day, but
Yeah. Because, you can get a good microphone for as little as $30-40.
Yeah.
To get started with. With my students, I usually recommend like a Blue Snowball or something to get started because it's a USB plug-in. And you can go.
do have some like that. More specifically, I was looking for like an interview. I'm sorry, go ahead.
thank you.
If we were doing an interview setup for a mix, hey, how are you? For a mixing, like a mini mixing board, like I was looking something along those lines, if needed at all for podcasting. So
Anyone want to start?
So if you want to start low cost, from a microphone perspective, the Samsung Q2U is a good kind of starter microphone. It's got XLR as well as USB capability built into it. Plus, you can plug in some headphones directly into the microphone. So it gives you a lot of options. I think it's like $59. So it's a great microphone to get started with, and it sounds great too.
I would say, are you actually producing any content right now? Or are you just looking to upgrade?
I'm shopping.
Yeah, so
Okay.
like my first tip would be make some just talking to anything first
Right.
and kind of
That's
get
true.
an idea of how your show feels, and then you can kind of figure out, like they were saying, what kind of equipment you need. But the number one thing is, what am I going to do, and how's it
Yeah.
going to sound?
What's
You
the
know.
content?
A lot of time. Okay, what's up? Sure.
So what you're saying is, and it goes back to what Mike said about just if you're going to start and looking to get started, use your phone. And in other words, don't let the hardware hang you up.
That's exactly where I was going to go.
Yeah. The best thing you own for the purpose is whatever you can get your hands on right now today. And then as you go on, you build and grow.
Well, keep in mind too that when you start, typically not too many people are going to be listening anyway. So, so if you make some mistakes in the beginning, it's okay. Just make it a point of learning and progressing and getting better.
Yeah.
And I was just going to comment on what you're saying. If you wanted to do something really cheap, my son and I got just a couple of cheap microphones, and we use Audacity and Voice Meter
There you go.
to get both mics on the same computer. Cheap. That software
Audacity's
that's both
free?
easy and they're free. And that's a good way to practice until you decide
Good.
more of what you need.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He also had a question about a mixing board. You can pick those up, what, $50, $60? I think
Yeah.
Right there.
Behringer still makes the
It's an
little.
object lesson.
There's one. Yeah, a couple of
that's what we got.
XLR inputs. If your interviews are face to face, you put your microphones in there. You can balance each one of them.
You can always find hand-me-downs too. Our first mixing board was a multi-tracker we found in a barn.
Right.
It worked just fine for the first, I think, 6 or 7 months of our show, and then we upgraded to something that was like a couple $100 or something like that.
One brand name that I would recommend though is, and I've used it myself, is a Mackie.
Mackies are good.
Boards. And the reason for Mackie is that they have very clean preamps, is what they call. So you're going to have a minimum amount of background hiss with your production if you turn up the gain. And they're pretty inexpensive.
One of the places you also might want to look at are pawn shops. You get people who try to podcast and they get frustrated with it, and they trade in their equipment, and and it's really, you can get dirt cheap there also. But I don't recommend starting big. Start small and then work your way up from that.
When we started, not to get into the whole thing of how we got into podcasting or whatever, but like we started with an omnidirectional mic, which is a misnomer, and we just tried out the show to see if it was even something people would want to listen to as a test. Gave it to people, took their feedback, changed things around, and then we realized this is something we definitely should move forward with because we have a D&D podcast. I don't know if you're familiar, there's about 8 billion D&D podcasts out there, so you have to like separate yourself a little bit, be different. So we did things on the low budget, but we didn't release any of that stuff. We just kept it in-house and just gave it to a few people to listen to see if it would be something worth listening to. Then when we got the go-ahead, that's when we upgraded to cheaper stuff like $20 microphones, XLR mics with the soundboard we found in a barn somewhere.
I love that story.
And then after that, the sound quality was good enough that we could release episodes, and then we started to make a little bit of money, and then, okay, now we can upgrade to a not barn mixer. So the main thing you want to do before you go all in on something, make sure you know what you actually want the show to be first. If it's like an interview show, think about how your interview show might be different from other interview shows or what the topics are going to be, that type of thing. And then once you figure that part out, try it out with something cheap, even if it's your phone sitting in a car, and see if it's something people like test it out with friends and family. People who will give you an honest opinion, not people who are just going to blow smoke up your skirt, and then move on from there.
I mean, yeah, I totally agree with that. I started off with the blue Snowball microphone and my laptop with Audacity, and that was it. And the more, when you start getting episodes in the can, you start listening to them, you'll start hearing, okay, these are the things that are bothering me, these are the things that are working, these are the things that aren't, and then you can figure out what tools are going to fix the problems that you're seeing. Because otherwise you're picking up a screwdriver to fix a nail, and that's not very helpful for you. So you really want to get some stuff in the can to figure out what your problems actually are before you figure out what tools you need to solve them.
Well, and one also big piece is what's your recording environment. You'd be surprised how many popular podcasts are recorded in clothes closets, just because there's clothes hanging all around you, and it's a perfect buffer for sound, right? So you don't have this echo effect that oftentimes, depending on the microphone you have, can create a significant echo if like you're in your kitchen or something like that, right? It's not the best recording environment.
We have more questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Do you feel that any topic can be a podcast? Do you feel like some topics lend themselves or don't to various areas?
Any topic can be a podcast.
Yeah.
If you're really into underwater violin playing, you should do a podcast on underwater violin playing.
Finding a microphone might be a challenge, but okay.
I'm
Really,
just saying.
drive it based on your passions and
Yes.
what
Yeah.
gets you excited to get up in the morning and talk about.
Because that'll get you through too, because people will hear that passion come through in a podcast. And when people first start listening to a podcast, they're definitely listening to make sure that it sounds pretty good, but also to see if the person is actually vested in what they're talking about. Because if you're just talking at length on something you don't care about, they might listen to 5-10 minutes of that and then be like, okay, next. Because there's so much out there for people to listen to that you have to stand out, or at least show that you actually care.
The more niche, the better. Just find that weird offshoot that you're really into and just dive into it and talk about it, just like you would with your friends.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great joys of the internet is finding out that if you're into some really weird, obscure thing, you're not the only one. If you love it, I guarantee you there's someone else out there that loves it. And if you love it and you're talking about it and they find your show, they're going to want to hear it because they also love it.
But also, don't be discouraged if your numbers for the first few episodes aren't huge.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because that's one of the things I tell my students is 75% of the podcasts that start never make it past the 10th episode because they're not getting the numbers.
It's
and
called
they get
pod fading.
discouraged.
Pod fading.
Pod
Yeah.
fading.
I don't even look at the numbers anymore. I couldn't tell you if we have 3 million or 300, and frankly, I don't care. I'm doing what I love.
Exactly.
And I know somebody's listening because we have some Patreon people. I love them to death. We have some people who send in comments, whether audio or written. Love them to death, and that's who I want to communicate with.
Yeah, I mean, I basically only use the numbers. I look at them twice a month when I post an episode, and that's just to look at how did the numbers do in the last episode. Was there an episode doing really well, episode doing really not well, and maybe look at that and go, oh, was there something I did great or something I didn't do great? Maybe there's some tweaks I need to make based on the feedback. But that's it. That's all I care about.
Consider that you're building a community in a way, like you're trying to reach people and you want them to talk back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have like 4 people talking back to you, that's enough. You get a real big dopamine hit from the email. You're like, oh, someone likes what I said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah, and one stat that's available to all podcasters is provided by Apple, and that is part of their Podcast Connect program. You can log in to your Apple ID and look at your activity in your podcast on the Apple platform, and which is the vast majority of consumption of podcasts. And it will actually track through your timeline of your program when people stop listening and when they start listening. It'll be like this heartbeat thing that goes on, and you can see in the timeline of your show when people are dropping off. So when you make a transition to a different topic or you're talking about a different segment in the program, that you can see where the interest goes up, right? And that can help you kind of rejigger things with your show, because maybe you're not catching people at the beginning, but you're catching people at the end. So
is there a type of voice that's well suited for podcasting, and
No.
types of voice that's you want to avoid?
If Gilbert Godfrey can do voiceover
voice.
work,
So I don't like to listen to Gilbert Godfrey because he's
some
annoying.
people do. I can't imagine Iago on Aladdin without Gilbert Godfrey. But
There's
yeah,
no one
that's-
voice that'll make everybody
Right.
happy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Right.
anything.
yeah,
And don't be afraid of your own voice. Everybody
Right.
who's first started recording goes, that doesn't sound like me.
Yeah.
Because you hear an internal timbre
right.
that doesn't come across on the microphone.
yeah, and I think if you
Let
sound
it go. Just
too much like a radio guy, I think it's a detraction actually.
Yeah.
Be yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Stay over there.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I got started just this past week. I published 5 days ago. Apple. Thank you. You can't find it because Apple still hasn't approved it. Otherwise, I'd plug it. I mean, any experience on like what kind of time frame it takes? Like Google and Spotify have listed it, but Apple still nothing.
It varies.
Yeah.
It varies. The more you can put it out there, Spotify, great. Google, yeah. Stitcher, everywhere you can find a directory, post it, because you never know how people are going to come across that. And
Yeah, I'm on
the
there
more
too.
the merrier. It's not a one-trick pony anymore.
Exactly.
It's everything and anything. Yeah, it sounds like a bit of work, but what social media isn't?
Yeah.
Just get yourself out there. That's the biggest you could do. Put it out to everyone. You could even now hear your own podcast on Alexa and such through Amazon.
Right.
And it's just as many places as you can get it. You probably haven't heard from Apple because you and 5 zillion other people are putting out new podcasts daily. So
Yeah, I would just give it like a week or two, and then you can send like the customer support a message and just see, if there's anything hanging up. Sometimes there's a tech glitch, that sort of thing. For Spotify for
Sometimes?
us,
Yeah, there's a lot.
for Spotify for us, it took 1.5 years for them to get back to us. So, hey, what's a couple days?
got another question?
Yeah. Hey. So my sister, she's been doing podcasting for a while. She has like 20-ish episodes, and she's doing pretty well. But she's having a hard time increasing her audience, just like marketing her podcast. I mean, like she has like all like the social medias and stuff like that. Like she's on like Spotify, Apple, everything. She's just trying to build her brand. So like, what's like the best way to do that for this day and age?
Ah, the age-old question.
Yes, it
Like, get
is.
people to like me.
Well, I think that your biggest generator of new listeners is going to be your listeners.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if
sharing
you
that.
can inspire them to share to others, that's going to grow your show pretty much faster than social media will.
Word of mouth, or coming places like Dragon Con.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Get
yeah.
in the
Yeah.
real world and
Yeah.
meet your listeners.
I can give you an unorthodox example of how to do it. We have a podcast that we actually stream live, and we started doing random other video game streams and telling people that were watching that about our show. And then that had a halo effect, and then people are like, oh, if I like this, I'll like this show. And they started downloading, numbers go up. It's more challenging, obviously. There's more to it, but it was helpful.
There's a couple other things. So like for our show, one of the things we did, the morning stream does a thing where you can advertise for $5 a day. So we just put like $15 in, and then we got lucky because they messed up our ad, so they gave us 2 extra days for free. And then literally our numbers jumped up about 500 listens just because people were checking it out. And then we ended up getting picked up by the Giant Size Team Up Network because one of the guys who listened to the show happened to hear that advertisement and then listen to our show, and now he's like is a stalker an okay? Yeah, he's a stalker. Stalker? Okay, yeah.
Fine. Accurate.
Another idea is to the morning stream. Yep.
It's a great show.
Yeah, it's a great show with Brian Ibbett and Scott Johnson.
Scott Johnson.
Yeah. And then one of the other ideas that we've done and had some success with is find other shows and then reach out to them and then go on their show and then also plug, like, because most of the time they're going to let you plug your show. If they don't, then you probably shouldn't
Don't
go.
go.
Show.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another way because then you're basically putting out there to their listeners to, hey, come listen to our show. That's what
Have a 30 to 60 second audio promo for that show.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
basically cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you find those other shows? I'm local, so
Just go-
it's
What-
hard to find.
Go to Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't
You can
necessarily
search on
be
location.
in person. You could. It would have to be probably over the internet.
Email.
If you're looking for local, look for a podcast meetup in your area.
Yeah, meetup.com is a great place to find local
Yeah.
people. One of the biggest things is to figure out what your audience is and where they're going to be, because it's going to vary depending on the type of show you're doing. For instance, so if you're doing like a fantasy football thing and versus like a mythology thing, they're gonna be different places. I do a lot in like Facebook groups that are specific to different types of mythology, and I get real good interaction there. I do some stuff on Reddit because again, there's people who are really active there. Surprisingly, Instagram has been a really good place for me because I'm able to post just interesting mythology memes and stuff that I come up with because that's my audience. If you're doing something based at boomers, memes might not be your thing. That may not be helpful for you.
Well, exactly, and that's one of the things. Like here in Atlanta, there's Podcast Atlanta, and they meet monthly, and you could find them under Meetup, like you had mentioned.
They also have a Facebook group.
They do have a Facebook
They
group.
do.
And they're fairly popular, and they usually get at least probably 100 people at each of their, and so it's people either learning to do it or wanting to meet a network so that their shows grow. And that's some of the best ways to do it. And there are so many podcast groups up on Facebook.
And
there's for every topic you could think of, and just look it up that way.
Do want to say that promoting your podcast to other podcasters is probably not going to help you a lot. So some podcasters post to like the discussion areas within podcasting groups, and a lot of times that's not cool to do. And it's also podcasters don't listen to a lot of podcasts.
They're too busy producing them.
That's the unfortunate situation. So once you start podcasting, you get so busy that you typically don't listen to a lot of podcasts. So what you want to do is reach out to communities that are not podcasters.
That's, I hate to say it, but that's one of the reasons we stopped going to the old podcast expo and started coming to Dragon Con. We said, why are we talking to other podcasters? We should be talking to people who want to listen. And here I am in a podcast track. But anyway.
That's why I'm here.
From a marketing perspective, do you find that across any genre that a lump binge Netflix style release is better than a metered advertised type of release schedule?
That's a new question. I hadn't heard that before.
Did you mean like a weekly release?
Like instead of doing like a season of like 10 episodes all at once, you would do like
one episode a week.
Yeah, like instead of doing 12
Either.
over
Which one's
24
better?
weeks, like at a 2-week interval, would just dropping 12 at once and being like, haha, good luck, binge, get addicted, come back in a season.
Well, if you look at it from the foundation of the podcasting medium and where it started as a subscription-based medium, which means a free subscription. And I think one of the challenges has been in that subscription thing is starting to imply somehow that it's paid. So I think we're kind of in a little bit of a conundrum on this right now with podcasting and subscriptions. But generally, it's been the ideal release method would be once a week, once every 2 weeks. Is the best cadence, because what that does is that causes your audience to build you into their schedule, right?
Yeah,
And they come back each week.
There's also a technical challenge around that. If you just drop 12 episodes, someone's podcatching client is only checking like once an hour.
All right,
you're
thank
gonna
you,
go,
Chuck, for answering. That's what I was going to say.
What's new in the last hour? It'll get like just the last show.
Yeah, that's
and they won't know that there's 11 others in front of that.
And
so.
also remember, places like iTunes, they only do the last 50 shows too.
Right.
So if you binge put them out, they might miss part of your season or something like that also.
You never see it.
If your audience is ready for it, you could say, hey, look, I'm going to drop 10 shows over the next 10 days. That's probably a better way to do it.
I think some of that depends on the show too, right? Like
Right,
if you're doing
because-
Serial, like people were like hanging on, bated breath to true crime or to watch that story continue. But if you're just doing like your, normal, it can stand on its own episode, it may not be as enticing, for them to listen to the whole thing through. And they've only got so many hours for their ears on their commute. So they might not even get to episode 2 for a week,
From a psychology perspective, people love routine.
Yeah.
So if you give them something at least once a week, and you always do every single week, and try really, really hard not to miss a week, people will keep tuning in. If you miss a time, or if you do a binge and then you don't have any more episodes for a long period of time, people will forget, or they'll move on to something else. But if you constantly keep giving them that carrot to bite on, they keep on coming back or at least that's the hope.
Piece of candy.
Yeah, consistency is one of the major factors with
consistency.
podcasts, and that's how you build your audience also.
Yep.
Is you want someone to want to come back to hear you and not forget about you, because there's 50 zillion other people out there who will take your place in a heartbeat.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why you do see like a Serial put out like 13 episodes and then stop producing for a year and then come back with another one is because it takes them so long to produce the programs that they can't do it every week, or it's too expensive to do it every week and they can't afford it. So those are sometimes the reasons why you see that kind of season-based approach to podcasting. It's
Nobody's going to forget NPR.
Well, exactly. That's true.
We got another question.
First, I want to thank you for podcasting for dummies. That's like what, I don't know, everything was so overwhelming, but then reading that book really helped like my fears.
Thank you.
I was going to ask about, in fictional or nonfiction ones where either interview style or you're giving, information like NPR, what is your technique for using like music? Because I've listened to some where it's just dead silent and they kind of lose you, but I've listened to some where they do like so much background music. They'll be talking about like, I don't know, fish, and the background music's like dunna dunna dunna, and it's too much. So what's your technique for kind of some ambient music?
Hey, it's all about the content.
Yeah.
What are you trying to produce with it? I agree with you. I think too much music in a podcast can be very distracting.
Exactly.
Depends on what it is.
But also you have to worry about royalty-free music too,
Yeah.
because that's where you can get into a lot of trouble, and a lot of podcasters have started really getting into, using an artist and stuff. And there's for years been people saying, "Oh, well, you could do like 30 seconds of it." And
No,
That's not real.
Nothing is.
Though there is some significant progress being made right now around music licensing and podcasting. We're right on the cusp of having licenses for some of the larger music labels. So it's starting to happen. It's going to be probably another year before we see a lot of progress here. We're going to see the very beginnings of it happen around Christmas music, believe it or not, coming up here in the fall, where you'll be able to get the ability to legally play Christmas music in your podcast. So,
Oh yeah, can't wait.
Right.
If you want like a word to use to Google for other people's topic, the bed music is what they usually call that, like when it's playing underneath the words and then like fading out. That's if you're looking for more discussion on it, that's a good way to find what you're after.
Yeah, I mean, embed music can be great, but just a word of warning, it is going to increase your editing time a lot.
Yeah.
And your cost.
And your cost. It takes a lot of time to adjust the levels, particularly if you're running it through the entire show.
A lot of the gray area also is if you're doing like a music review podcast or something, you almost have to get permission from the artist, and then the studio, and then the label, and it's a real headache half the time.
I have two questions actually. One is cosplaying over a video game at all a good idea? And my second question is there a limit to how many people you should have in a podcast to where the audio gets so loud with everyone talking over each other.
If you're in the same room, it's easier to have a few people, like, because you can see the cues. Like, people know when someone wants to speak. If you're just on a conference call and it's all just people going,
no, you go ahead.
No, your turn. It's
Your
just
editor
a nightmare.
will hate you
like,
if you do that.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, a
if you're
D&D
the
podcast.
I wouldn't
probably
do
has the
more than
best.
6.
Yeah.
6 would be the upper limit
Yeah,
for me
6
as
is
well.
the most because 5 players.
I mean,
and a DM.
actually, probably ideally 3 to 4. Max.
Yeah, I was gonna say 3 would probably be just from
And-
from being able to hear and pick out the different people talking.
And
3 is about
Exactly.
the maximum the ear can hear.
Yeah, and
If
hopefully all of them have different sounding voices.
Yeah.
Right.
So
If my brother and I did a
similar.
podcast, you wouldn't be able to tell us apart, and the listener would go, "Are you talking to yourself
Well, one
again?"
One of the things we started doing on my podcast is that we've actually have a video feed that the audience can't see. We just do an audio podcast, but this way we could see when somebody wants to speak and everything, and it makes it a lot easier.
That helps.
A lot of
Oh, yeah, that
times.
helps.
If you got the bandwidth for
then
it,
you don't
yeah.
get people talking over each other. You don't have, and it makes my life so much more easier when I edit.
For instance, a word to the wise. I'm on the Giant Size Team Up Network, just to shamelessly keep plugging them or anything. But on Breaking the Panel, they do movie reviews, like round table discussions. Well, one of the first ones they had was, I think, 8 to 10 people. Oh boy!
Yikes!
I think it was.
That's.
I'm
sorry,
sir.
It's got to be like Game of Thrones.
Because everybody wants to get an opinion in, and then you have to keep it short, but everybody wants to talk, and some people like to talk more than others. Names will not be mentioned.
Yeah, it's almost like once you get up into that kind of level, it's almost like you have to reintroduce people constantly during the show. It's like, hey, Steve, what do you think about this, or that kind of thing? As a host, you kind of have to lead that.
Sure. I have a question about length. Is there a sweet spot for length before you lose people's attention, or if it's too short?
No.
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
It really depends on the content. There are some shows that lend themselves well to a very short format. I did one that was about 4 minutes called the Gmail podcast. I just give them a quick tip about Gmail. And then I've done 90-minute podcasts. They're longer to edit.
Hell, Joe Rogan has a 5-hour podcast.
Yeah, some of the biggest podcasts in the world are 3 to 5 hours long.
I mean, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History is famous for being incredibly long, and on the other end of the scale, you've got The Way I Heard It, which is no more than 5 minutes long most of the time.
Yeah.
It's a question of what your format, what your show is going to dictate the length.
Yeah, our show started at an hour and then creeped its way on up to 2 hours.
Every show does that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
it
then,
starts out at a certain
and
level
then I
and it gets
almost,
longer.
murdered everyone in the room. So now it's back down to about a nice hour 10, hour 15. So, and that's like a D&D podcast, but most D&D podcasts I find typically range between the 45 minutes to an hour and a half mark. The ones that go over that, especially, but again, it depends on your content. Because if you're doing D&D and it's an hour and a half of combat, I don't care how good a show it is, an hour and a half of combat gets old.
Yeah.
But if you're doing an interview, then you could just keep going and going and going, just like Joe Rogan, or if Hardcore History, that's so interesting because the way he presents everything, he could talk for 2 hours and you're just enthralled the whole time. So it's really up to what you want to do.
Also, if you do a longer podcast, timestamp it so people know where to listen to. If you have multiple topics or something, it's a lot easier for your listeners. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to either skip over parts they don't want to hear or items like that, and that usually goes up in the show notes, and it makes it easier for them to find.
Yeah, some will say that you have to earn your length with your audience. So if you're a new podcaster, it may be smart for you to start out a little shorter because it's going to be easier for you to put the content together, and then as you get better at it, it's okay to go a little longer.
Good point.
So kind of earn that with your audience is probably a good mental positioning.
What do we got?
How much editing is too much editing?
Oh, God.
Again, it depends on
That's
the
a rabbit
content. It really does. If you're doing an audio play, you're going to be spending some time editing and timing the voices and whatnot. If you're doing just a day in the life, slice of my day kind of thing, say, hey, you know what? I'm making bread. I'm opening the mail. There are people that do podcasts about opening their mail.
I've
they
heard
got some good mail, and you press record on the phone and you talk, and when you're done, you're done. Your process may change over time. You may find that, hey, I used to start by inserting the intro music, and then I would talk and mix that audio together. Now I can just press a button and talk and move the fader down when it's time to jump in and start talking. make it easy on yourself. The easier it is, the more you'll like to do it, because if you don't like doing it, you won't do it.
A lot of times in my class, the students, who start doing their podcasts always find that they over-edit themselves at first.
Yes.
And as they get more and more into podcasting, they don't do it as much because they get more comfortable hearing their voice, get more comfortable with any kind of mixing and everything, and just it's with experience, and it also depends on the person. There's people who over-edit and take 5 hours to edit a 1 hour podcast.
Right. Who would do that?
There are people out there.
And it's okay. It's okay to have some ums and ahs in your podcast.
Yes.
I mean, it's okay to breathe in your podcast.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a natural part of speaking.
Right.
One of
the key things you want to get rid of is dead air, because if it lasts too long, you've got somebody going, "Did the radio turn off?" Like what? That's a big thing.
Dead air is the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, but ums and ahs, like that's conversation. I've heard it said multiple times in this track. Like, just your podcast is a conversation with the person listening. We're real accustomed to hearing and it doesn't bother us unless it gets really exhausting.
I was gonna say, if somebody has a verbal tick, like there was a guy that I listened to, and he had that. At the beginning of everything
you can spot
he
that
said,
waveform,
and it would drive me nuts. And I was
Or
like,
real
why doesn't
deep
he
breaths.
just cut that out?
But there
everyone
is-
has one of their things.
Yeah.
there is such a thing as a dramatic pause.
You can,
Yeah,
that's a
comedic
little
pause.
bit different. Yeah.
You can have a comedic pause.
So
You
if
do
it
that all the
adds
time, too.
some flavor to your podcast, to say something and then wait a little bit and say something else, it's okay a little bit.
A lot of times, though, like when
Yeah, it
you're
has to be
doing a live
intentional.
podcast, or something, you're waiting for an audience reaction, or you're waiting for your podcast partner to giggle or laugh or something too. But don't dead air is like a kiss of death.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the more you do it, the more you'll start to know as you're doing it the things that are going to be a trouble to edit later. And you can, like, for me, I do a scripted show, and so a lot of times I would, when I first was starting, I'd just run through it once, and then I'd come back and go, oh, that sounded terrible, I got to re-record it. Whereas now I can hear myself when I go through a phrase and go, no, that didn't sound good. Let me just run through that again real quick.
Yep.
Sometimes I'll do it 4 or 5 times in a row so that I can pick the one that I like and keep going, and that will save me a lot of time in post production later.
One of the things I do, because I'm too close to the speaker. All right, that's another thing you don't do. Okay. But actually, I do one of the Dragon Con podcasts on my network, and we actually have to read the guest's name. So we've gotten it to that it's a joke that take a shot every time we mess up somebody's name or something. And we always joke by the end of the podcast, you'll be wasted.
We have a segment on our podcast called On This Day in History, and inevitably we'll end up with some like Russian physicist or something that has a birthday. And it's always a challenge for both of us, but I think Craig takes the brunt of most of the humor in that aspect.
It's intentional.
Getting back to timing real quick, remember that a lot of your listeners will be listening at double speed or 1.5. So what may seem like an eternal 2-second pause is only 1 second for them. In fact, I listen to most of my podcasts at double speed.
That's true. And it can be a benefit not to speak too fast, too, right?
Yeah. That's one of the things I constantly struggle with.
Same here. It's a huge fight for me to slow myself down.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people that takes way too much time to edit. When I first started, we didn't have anything special. It was just 4 hours to edit, like an hour. Well, to be fair, recording time was 2 hours, and I had to chop all of the things you're not allowed to say ever to other people down to about an hour 15. Then I started to get ambitious, and I was like, ooh, I'd like to put background music and sound effects, and then it went up to 8 to 12 hours for an hour and a half episode. And now I've lessened that back down to about 4 to 6 hours, but still keeping the music and the sound effects. So it's really however crazy you want to make yourself. Just don't give yourself too much to do.
We literally record live to tape. Like, we go live, we put a stamp on the beginning and the end, just our music, and it's done. I put the show out within 10 minutes after we're done recording it live. I'm like,
you can put other elements in there. Like there's soundboard apps that you push a button and it inserts your favorite sound clip or bed music for this segment of the show. It's okay to let the listener know I'm transitioning from the news to birthdays and from birthdays to the interview segment, and those are fine. Make it easy for yourself. And again, soundboard apps are a wonderful way to do that.
You can actually have a life after your podcast, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you can go to bed.
Are there, so you guys have been touching on this briefly, but are there certain things that you definitely should edit out? Someone snoring in the background or a cat
Yes, on that one I was.
We've actually had somebody fall asleep while we were recording as one of our guests.
Anything you don't intentionally want in that production, you're going to have to edit out. I mean, inevitably, Mondays, I'm recording something for work, a voiceover for a video we're going to release, and the guy shows up with the leaf blower. You know? Like,
or the lawnmower outside.
Yeah.
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 That's always a good one.
Dog barking.
Well, I'll start again in 30 minutes.
Yeah. Coughs, sneezes, burps unless it's meant to be in there, farts also unless that's meant to be in there, things that people shouldn't say.
Yeah.
The
Those are all
chewing.
authentic.
We refer to that as mastication theater.
Yes, it's awful.
When we first started our show, we left all the burps and farts in, and we had a Reddit comment that said, "Please stop burping into the microphone." So now I have to, because we're a drunken D&D podcast, I have to go in and cut out all the frickin' burps.
You need a mute switch.
You can spot that waveform.
There's one.
I have a quick question just about the publishing aspect of things. I'm an Apple person through and through, and I'm just scared I'm going to tell someone, hey, listen to my podcast, and they're going to be like, I tried to listen to it on insert popular platform here.
Sure.
What are the ones you have to be on? I'm struggling to like kind of cut through all the bullshit when I Google that question.
Well, you want me to take that one?
Yeah, go for it.
The largest one is Apple Podcasts. So that's got about 60% of the consumption of the podcasting industry, just in general. There's a recent entry, which is Spotify. Well, I guess relatively recent. They've been trying to come into the podcasting space for about 3.5 years now, and they finally have it right now. So they're picking up about 10% of the market right now, which is the second largest right now, and it's been a long time since there's been another platform that's been as big as that. So Spotify, Pandora is getting into the medium now. So radio.com, Stitcher, iHeartRadio is, it's a place to submit to. I agree, but actually getting your podcast into Apple Podcasts gets you into all the other smaller listening apps, which actually puts you closer to about 80% of the podcasting market, because of Pocket Casts and all those, they use the Apple catalog to populate their directories in their apps. So Apple is the key.
Also, make a feed available on your website. Just say, hey, click here and listen. Always make sure you have a listen button so somebody can listen to that episode right now without bringing up any other additional application. Yes, have it on your website and an RSS feed that they can, hey, you want to copy this URL, put it into whatever you want, and you got it.
And then there's Google Podcasts too, which is another huge player that's entering the medium right now that has just phenomenal and huge potential. Google is starting to do some amazing things around getting podcasts promoted in the search results. So we're starting to see some significant progress in that. I think over the next 6 months, you're going to see some significant improvements to the Google Podcast experience around podcasters being able to submit directly to them, be able to have more of a relationship with Google with your podcast. So there's some significant conversations happening right now around that stuff.
And if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, I at one point was like, okay, I'm just going to have this fun little exercise. Went on the internet and started typing top D&D podcasts, and there are a series of websites out there that literally just have shows listed, but you can listen to them as they come through, and you could do that for pretty much any type of show. We ended up getting on, I think, 4 websites. I know Board Game Geek was one. I forget the other 3 because this was 3 years ago. But yeah, I mean, it can't ever hurt to add your stuff out there, like to other sites.
So on my podcast, what I want to do is I have it's myself and like 1 or 2 others depending on the week, but I want to have someone that can call in for like a little 3 or 4 minute segment. What is the technical part of that where I can have someone call in and be part of a live recording with other people?
That can get really messy. Like we do a podcast, like my podcast, I don't have another person in the studio. Smash is remote, so she calls in via Skype, and we do video that way. And we use a hardware solution called Mix Minus, which is above probably where we're going in this particular track. But that's something to look into, but it requires a mixer that take the audio coming out and minus it coming back in. But there are software solutions for that these guys might be more familiar with than I am.
We actually use Zoom for it, and you can just send a link to the person who you want to talk to. They just click on it, and they will be brought into your room, and they could talk to you right off their computer, off their phone. It's pretty straightforward.
But how does that work with like also having other people? So right now I just got a snowball,
right?
And so it's
That's
myself, but if I do the phone call thing, am I using like the speaker phone through Zoom?
Well, you probably don't want to use a regular cell phone call.
No.
Would be my recommendation. Skype actually has Skype recording built right into the software now.
He was saying you don't want to use a phone like a just straight phone call.
Yeah,
that's
like a cell phone call.
Zoom can be the same way. You could talk to people through the Zoom app.
Yeah, Zoom
They all call into a central bridge.
They're going to call into a central
and
bridge.
you hit record, and you're basically done. It'll say, here's a link to your audio and video files.
And Zoom is awesome also because you could also, if you save it to your hard drive, you can also break each call into a separate track, and that way it's easier to edit.
Okay, so now, I think I'm following you now. So you're saying just I would do Zoom, record the whole thing, versus using GarageBand or some other app or something.
You would still bring those files in. You could edit them in GarageBand.
You edit those MP3 files or whatever you download them as.
Yeah, it is possible to take that video file and be able to extract the audio out of it too, and make that your audio podcast as well. But the simplest solution here is just recording in Skype. I mean, the audio quality is pretty good. It actually will record the video too. So it's a recent change to Skype. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's the easiest way. There's this is a rabbit hole that we could talk for an hour on.
And like the version of Zoom is free if it's just two people talking to each other, but it's also a limited amount of time. If you pay $14.99 a month for Zoom, you get unlimited people on the line, and you could talk for however long you want.
Nice.
So, but Skype is still free.
Yep.
There is another solution too. It's called a double ender recording software platform, and probably a good example of it is Ringer. I don't know if it's kind of an odd spelling, but it basically records on your mobile phone or your desktop as well, but it records locally with your local computer, and then when you're done doing the conversation with your guest, it uploads it up to the server and combines them into one media file. So that's also out there too. Typically those are paid services though, but they're not very expensive. But the audio quality is great.
So I have a question about sponsorship, and how do you deal with when you have someone who wants to like kind of sponsor your podcast, but you're worried about kind of your audience's kind of buy-in about your validity of kind of what you're doing. How do you kind of temper that with like even engaging in like the certain aspects of sponsorship when you don't even really have any clue to begin with? So like
you're talking about like the philosophical, not the financial aspects.
Well, no, financially, as in like either they want to promo ads or that kind of thing, where you are associating yourself with, let's say, a brand, and now like your objectivity is now like kind of in question.
I would let your audience know ahead of time that you're considering it, and let them voice, their opinions. Some will say, "Hey, I'm cool," as long as it's aligned with your content. I mean, if you're talking about baby formula and babies, you probably don't need a used car salesman on the line.
Yeah, we just got 3 sponsors starting for Dragon Con. One is a Dice Tower, one is Dice, and one is Booze. All 3 line right up, but we made sure, and this is for any sponsor, if they're talking about they want to sponsor you, you have a conversation with them and say, this is what we're okay doing. If you're not okay with that, then we're not going to let you sponsor us or anything like that.
Exactly. If you're doing say you're doing a D&D podcast, you don't want to have a gambling advertiser or Sleep Number or something like that. It's just do what's appropriate to your podcast, basically.
Yeah. And then you have to find out, do they want like a plug that they send to you and they stick it in your show? That might be too sort of out of place for us. We said, is it okay if we use a dirty joke? And they said, yeah. So I think we said something last night about Elderwood Academy. Though your wood may be elder, your rolls will, you'll stay erect forever, something like that. I forget.
Because that's
Okay.
you have
Yeah.
to look at it the other way also, because you have to let the sponsor
Yeah.
know
Yes.
what you're talking
Yeah.
about too, because some of them might not feel comfortable with your content.
It's a whole discussion you have to have back.
Yeah, I would actually start out a little slow on this, and kind of prep your audience for it. But the big thing is, advertising in this space it's evolving very quickly, and it's
Very.
becoming very sophisticated and very complicated these days around dynamic ad insertion, capabilities, being able to trade out ads in your archive shows too. So there's lots of capabilities, but I would walk or I would crawl before you run on this stuff, because you got to bring your audience along. And you got to also build an audience in order to get into the ad business
And
too.
if you're worried about some of
Right.
your audience, like you can actually take Patreon and use that as like your ad-free
Ad-free.
feed. So you're like $5 a month, and you get all my shows ad-free, and everybody else who doesn't pay me, the savages, can have, I don't actually have a lot of people paying me, but they can have the ad-based show. So
yeah. So and smaller shows do sell their shows just as shows, not so much based on CPM or these more sophisticated advertising principles. But if you're doing a genre of content that aligns really well with a particular company, just go offer them the ability to have a spot on your show, sponsor your show, and just sell it for $200 an episode or $300 an episode, and build that audience, especially if the show aligns really closely with the demo of that company's customer base. It can really be an attractive thing, and you don't have to make it really complicated.
I did have a quick question. A lot of people just started diving in about how to record and what equipment. Before you even do any of all that, what is like one piece of advice you would give to anyone who's even considering trying to create their own podcast?
That sounds like a closing question.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well done. I mean, figure out what
Perfect
you wanna
timing.
do. Yeah. Are you excited about the thing you want to talk about? Like, you're sitting around talking with your friends. Like, this is the way a lot of podcasts happen, right? Oh,
We should start a podcast
we should
about
start
Star
a
Trek.
podcast, it's gonna be great. Yeah, you sit around and you talk to your friends or yourself, and you're really passionate about something. You go, oh man, we just talked for like 45 minutes on that. Maybe we should have recorded that. And can we do it over and over? Like, do we have enough stuff we like to do that we can just keep going? So that's my tip.
I mean, yeah, you gotta have the passion. I was moderating a panel yesterday on YouTube, and they were talking about they met these people who were doing. They went, Nerf YouTubes are popular. We're gonna do that, and within a year, they were crying because they hated it so much.
Exactly, and that's
So-
one of the things we talk about is do what you're passionate about. Do what you talk about with your friends. Do what you like, if it's your hobby, if it's your passion, but stop when you lose that passion, because you could still have 5,000 listeners, but if you're not having fun doing it, if it's a chore, your listeners are going to start hearing that in your voice about your content and everything, and you just need to walk away from it. And or get somebody who can re-energize you in it, or change it a little bit. Podcasts change format all the time, or topics also.
It's okay to pod fade. I've pod faded like 4 or 5 times. So
yeah.
And let your audience know if you plan on doing that too, if you can.
Yeah.
Say, look, I'm talking about this television show. If the TV show ended, you say, I kind of ran out of content here, people. But join me, because I'm sure I'll find another television show to talk about. I love it.
Research. Whatever your topic is, research other shows that are doing the same thing to see what's already being done out there, and then try and do something a little bit different, so that way you stand out amongst everyone else. That makes it a lot easier to to get noticed. If you see like a lot, for instance, if you see a lot of film review, and nobody had ever done Mystery Science Theater 3000 before, and then that comes out, it's like, oh, that's technically a film review, but it's way different from your standard, let's sit around a couch and just talk about films. So I would definitely recommend research.
Make
Yeah.
your own voice, basically.
Yep.
Yep.
Because there's 2 zillion other people. You don't need to make yourself sound like Mark Maron. You don't need to make yourself sound like anyone else who's out there. Be yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
And also have some good graphic artwork for your program too.
Yeah.
The square
Yes.
artwork.
Yeah.
Make it
Yeah.
compelling. Think of it like a billboard ad, right? It needs to sell your show, but not be overly selling though, because Apple won't feature you if you put in like your website address
Yeah.
or other kind of self-promotional things. It just needs to be branded, what your show's about. Communicate to your audience what the show's about in that graphic as best you can, and then make it pop, make it stand off on the page.
It's part of the planning and prep stage.
Right.
Yeah. You have
Catchy,
your
simple
passion.
title, too.
You have there's a certain number of things. Where are we hosting this? Do we have enough content to talk about this every week or every day or every month? What is our meter that we're going to do? You may only see these people once a year, but it's on a weekend in Atlanta. We could get a whole season's worth of show. We wouldn't be seen for 48 hours, but we could make a whole season. How do you plan to produce that? There's sort of a checklist you got to go through before you start releasing content. On the other hand, you could just pick up your phone and go, "Hey, it's me again. Good to talk to you. Let's talk baby formula."
Yeah. It's called Facebook Live, right?
Yeah, it kind of is.
Hi, I'm Wayne. I'm with What the Riff podcast. We're a music commentator podcast, and was here last year and had just started my podcast, and we finished our first year. I want to say thank you for a lot of the advice you gave. A lot of the social advertising on your social medias, I tried to do a lot of that through Facebook. I schedule my Facebook posts, but and then you try to promote them. Same thing on Reddit, same thing on doing Fiverr, and did not really get any results except for getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, getting on our podcast, and making sure my podcast description is one of the first ones, and it's resulted 25% of my listeners are from out of the country. And so what else is there to do to try to get that on a digital podcast, digital marketing focus? You talked about on Reddit. Whereabouts on Reddit? I'd like to know.
Well, so Reddit we don't even do anymore. That lasted for about a few months before we just noticed nobody was paying attention to it anyways,
right.
Which is a lot of things. So then it's a lot of word of mouth, going on other shows, cross-pollination, that kind of thing. There's lots of different ways. There's no one perfect way, otherwise you'd hear it about 8 billion times by now. It's really, you have to sort of try this and that and see what sticks. Like, throw as much crap at the wall and then,
trial by error
hope.
is the best way.
I'd say become an expert in distribution, I think, is another big thing too. Understanding the ecosystem of the podcasting space, because right now there's a lot of growth in distribution platforms outside of the United States. I mean, a lot of people here in the United States struggle to understand what's happening here, but there's platforms that are developing outside of the United States that are taking on podcasts. We just did a deal with a company called Deezer, and it's a huge It's a huge music platform. That's actually, Deezer used to own Stitcher, but they sold Stitcher. And now they've launched their own podcast catalog, but they're huge outside of the U.S. And people outside of the U.S. love to listen to U.S. podcasts, love the English podcasts. It's huge outside of the U.S. So getting in those platforms that are popular outside of the U.S. is also important. That's one of the big reasons why Spotify is doing so well, is because they have great penetration outside of the U.S. Actually, they have better penetration outside of the U.S. than even Apple has. So it's, those are the future opportunities of this medium. It's not so much the growth opportunities in the United States, even though there's a lot. It's just outside. There's this audience to be grabbed out there.
I would definitely just consider finding communities around the thing you're into and talking to people. Like doing the whole, I'll do this for you and help you with this and be a part of your community. And then go, hey, by the way, I have a podcast that's kind of around what you guys dig. We've found a lot of our listeners just from being an active part of some other random group. And they're like, hey, that's, we like this guy. And now he's told us he does a podcast. Oh, we didn't know that. That's cool. So give first, ask later, I think is key.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am a little bit more active on Reddit, but it's in communities where I'm an active participant completely apart from the podcast. A couple of different mythology subreddits where I'll be answering questions, providing feedback on things, where at that point I'm now a known person, I'm a known entity. So if I'm dropping the episode, people are like, oh, this is the guy that helped out here, here, and here. Exactly. Oh, I checked that out.
Add value before you can capture a listener is the key.
Yep. When it comes to marketing, strive for that uniqueness. Now, I accidentally tripped into this a couple of years ago, and I shortened my title at work. It's like Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager. That rolls off the tongue. And I realized I was talking to developers, and I said, developers don't want to hear the word marketing in your title, or they tune out. So I shortened it up to Senior TPMM, and my boss gave me grief, and I made my explanation. He said, that's not a bad idea. Well, then I get a guy in Orlando who says, hey, I did a Google search on what the F is TPMM stand for? What came to the top of the Google list? My name. Nobody in the world has thought of this title before. Like, score! Wish I had known that about 16 years ago.
We got one more question right here.
Hey, I just wanted to ask about scripted podcasts and or more scripted stuff.
That's this guy being, right?
Scripted podcasts.
I mean, I script mine. Yeah, I script my podcast. I usually spend about 5 hours a week for about a 30 to 45-minute show. And I initially tried to do mine without a script, just going off the story, and I found myself flubbing, missing lines. So I found myself initially just doing show notes, and more and more I realized this is just a script. But the key, if you're going to script it, is it needs to be you. It needs to be your voice. Unless you're doing a character, in which case you need to make sure you have unique character's voice. It needs to read natural. It needs to read like what it is. Because if it sounds artificial, if it's not you, it's going to come across as real awkward and real weird, and no one's going to want to listen.
And really, any podcast can be scripted podcast. At the end of the day, it depends on your comfortable ability to think quickly on your feet, to follow an outline.
Okay, guys, time's up.
Time's up.
Time's up.
Wow. Okay, drop the hammer.
Boom. Let's thank you guys for coming out very, very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Rate us on the app.
Please pick up the app. 5 stars.
Yep.
Thank you, guys. Sorry.
I'm
about
in this
that.
room at 8:30 if you guys want to have some fun. Gallery 7.
10 o'clock tonight. Botched versus Adventure Inc.
5.
I have business cards.
Last minute.
I know, right?
Is that okay? Oh.